So we're going to continue this lesson. Bezrat Hashem, we're going to finish today. It's early by me in Eretz Yisrael. It's later by you in America. So Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to go into Shabbat with this lesson with a lot of joy, a lot of simcha, a lot to look forward to, and what to work on. Okay? So now Rabbi Nachman is bringing this story of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana from Bava Metzia. And we're saying how there was just to go back for 1 second. They were traveling in a ship. They saw a bird who was standing up to its ankles in water, and its head was in the firmament. He concluded that there wasn't much water and wanted to go down into Likutey nafshin, to cool down ourselves. A voice came out from Shemayim, called out to us, "Do not go down into here, because there's a carpenter's axe that fell in here 7 years ago and has not yet reached the ground." Not only because the water is abundant, but because the water runs so rapidly, Rav Ashi said. This bird was called Ziz Sadai, like King David says, and Ziz Sadai is with me. Okay, so now we learn that the bird in this story is really speech. And Rabbi Nachman says that the power of speech is to be able to cause a Jew to return back to the light of the Ein Sof, back to his source in the oneness of reality and the oneness of Hashem. And the way it does so is because the speech, when it's coming from the right place, reminds a person that he has not achieved all that he thought he has in his life. It makes a person realize that there's a lot more to go. There's a lot more to grow. When does a person able to have speech that mechazeks him, that encourages him to grow spiritually, to become a better person? So it's only, we're going to see, when he's shmirat brit. Because only when he's shmirat brit does he achieve humility. And we're going to see how that is. A carpenter's axe fell in here 7 years ago, has not yet reached the ground. What does that mean? That the voice from Shemayim, it informed them the root of their arrogance, so that they should distance themselves from it. And it says, do not go down into here. Meaning what? That a person should not act humbly for the sake of arrogance. Okay? So we know that in the Torah world, in the religious world, in the Jewish world, there's a huge concept of humility. We learn it from Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the greatest man who ever lived. He's also the most humble person who ever lived. And from all of the sages, from all of Chazal, from all the Hasidic masters, from all the tzaddikim, we see that the greatest trait of a person is humility. To not be pretentious, to not think that one is greater than one actually is, and all the more so to know where one's greatness comes from, to not think that it comes from him and himself. And therefore it says in Pirkei Avot, a person should be very, very humble. So why does the language of Chazal that a person should be very, very humble, not just to say that we should be humble, which is enough from Chazal. You know, we know that when the tzaddikim told us something 2,000 years ago, it was straight from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Har Sinai. So why do they have to tell us not only to be humble, but to be very, very humble? Because obviously we see that when a person even tries to achieve humility, they might be doing it for the sake of some secondary reason. Or maybe even in a very subtle, maybe even subconscious way, I'm trying to become more humble because I want those people around me to feel that I'm greater than I really am. And Rabbi Nachman says when a person tries to look humble for that reason, that he looks like he's grown spiritually and therefore he's achieved real humility, he says this is really the greatest lack of humility, because humility means to be unpretentious. I was actually explaining to somebody recently, I forget who it was, talking my background and my parents. And I was saying how one of the most beautiful things that I got from my parents is that they're very unpretentious. They never acted like they were something that they were not. They never pretended to be something. They never cared what people thought about them. And thank God, they gave that to me, to whatever extent that they gave that to me. And obviously I've worked on it a lot since I've become Baal Tshuva. But Rabbi Nachman teaches, and Rav Natan brings it down many, many times, Tamimut, simplicity, is the key to having a good life. Simplicity, unpretentiousness is the key to being close to Hashem. Simplicity, unpretentiousness is the key to getting back into the land of Israel, to have Geula, to have redemption, to have Mashiach. Because the greatest barrier towards a connection with Hashem is making oneself something that they're not. Because the stamp of Hashem is emet, is truth. So when a person clothes himself in something that's pretentious or a lie, so then when a person does that, he's really disconnecting himself from the root of his soul. He's disconnecting himself from the root of all good, which is the light of Hashem. And really our goal is just to get out of the way, because there is really no issue with Hashem giving us what we want, whether it's parnasa or whether it's shalom bayit, whether it's joy, whether it's truth, whether it's connection, whether it's peace. He's always giving that to us. The issue only comes with, are we a channel for that light? Are we a channel for that shefa? And the greatest barrier to that channel is a lack of humility, is pretentiousness. So now Rabbi Nachman says that this voice was from Shemayim was coming to tell them that a person who's trying to be humble for the sake of being pretentious about his humility, this is the greatest busha to Hashem, because he's taking Hashem's garment, which is called splendor, which is called glory, which is called hitparut. Right? We know that when the Jewish people, they put on tefillin on their heads, this is called our pe'er, this is called our glory, our splendor. And we know that Hashem also has his own spiritual version of tefillin that he wears, like Gemara says in Masechet Brachot. And instead of our tefillin, which talk about how amazing Hashem is and how much we love him, his tefillin has the opposite, how amazing the Jewish people are and how much he loves us. So it's a very beautiful thing. But our ability to connect to that is to make a space for that within ourselves. And so too for Hashem. How does he have room for us? He had to make a space for us. He was everywhere. There was nothing else besides him. How does he create a new reality? How does he create people in which you can have a beautiful relationship full of love and wonderment and connection and deeper intimacy? He does that by making a greater and greater space within himself to include something else. So that all comes from humility and unpretentiousness. And now all of a sudden, like we see in this pasuk, it says, Hashem malach yeut lavesh, right? Every Shabbat we say this pasuk. It says that Hashem, he's running the world, he's orchestrating the world. Geut lavesh. He's enclothing himself within this concept of geut. Geut means majesty or glory. And what does that mean for us? It means that when these are his clothing, just like we have clothing, so to speak, right? I have a suit on, another person has a t-shirt on, another person has a hoodie on, another person has his T-neck and his backwards cap, right? Everybody has their own clothes. So what's Hashem's clothes? It's called true honor, something beautiful, something wondrous, something majestic. These are Hashem's clothes. So that means that when a person says that he's the own source of his wonderment, he's the own source of his good, he's the own source of his blessing in his life, he's the own source of his majesty. So then he has, so to speak, taken Hashem's clothes and put them on himself. And this is called, instead of the kavod of Hashem, this is called the kavod of the Sitra Achra. And this is what disconnects ourselves from Hashem. And this axe fell. What's the concept of the axe falling into the water? This is the concept of the levush, the garment fell into the water. Like the pasuk says, V'chitzno me'amer. The harvester did not fill his hand, nor put bound sheaves into his garment's corner. So we're going to see a deep connection in a second. Why is the concept of the axe, the concept of a garment, concept of a corner? We know that in the Torah, the garment has four corners. Right? The concept of a garment from the Torah is one that has four corners. And therefore, in halakha, we learn that if a Jew wears a shirt that has 4 corners, he needs to put tzitzit on them. If he wears a shirt like most shirts that are worn today, so you don't have to put tzitzit on them. It's not a mitzvah d'oraita that you have to put tzitzit on that garment. However, if a person happens to be wearing a 4-corner garment, which in our case is usually only the situation when a person wants to fulfill the mitzvah of wearing tzitzit, so then he wears a 4-corner garment, and then he has a chiyuv, he has a responsibility from the Torah to put tzitzit on those garments. So now we're seeing that the concept of the garment or the corner of that garment is like Hashem's majesty. Okay, we're going to see what that means in a moment. Bar Nagara, there was a carpenter. Who is the carpenter? Zeh Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is Hashem. Hashem's a carpenter. How do we know that? Kamosh Katuv, like it says in Tehillim, Hamkarev Mayim Aliotav. He lays the beams of his upper chambers in the waters. Remember the river, the waters, the axe. Okay, like it says in Masechet Chulin, Elokeichem Nagarhu. It says in Daf Samech Amud Aleph in Masechet Chulin that Hashem your God is a carpenter. So there's an amazing story there where there was a woman who came up, a Roman woman who came up to Rabbi Yoshua, and he said, I heard that the God of the Jews is a carpenter. He's a carpenter, like a little measly carpenter. I heard that's what you guys think, that he's a carpenter. She said, do me a favor. Ask the carpenter to give me a spinning wheel. So Rabbi Yeshua prayed that she should get a spinning wheel. You know, Rabbi Nachman says in the 5th Torah, Likutey Moharan, whenever you see something lacking in the world, whenever someone brings to you a lacking, it's mechiyuv, it's incumbent upon you to realize that the whole world was created for you, meaning that that moment was created for you, that you should be able to fill the lacking of that which you hear or that which you see. But how am I going to fill the lackings of that which I see? If we're learning really everything comes from Hashem anyway, so then I can't do anything. So the answer is I can pray to fill that lack. Okay, so Rabbi Yeshua was a big tzaddik, and so he prayed to fill the lack of this Roman woman, who is really the emperor's daughter. Okay, so what happened? He prayed that she should be able to get this spinning wheel, and before she knew it, she developed what's called tarat, this skin disease, and as a result of having this skin disease, she actually was like outcasted from her community, and she had to join this marketplace, because that when you were in Roman times, if a person became a leper, they developed the skin disease, then they would be brought to the marketplace, and they would be shown to everybody, and they would give them a wheel to spin on, like as entertainment for people, which is obviously very cruel and horrific. But as a result of her mocking the Torah and mocking the fact that the King David says that Hashem is a carpenter, and Chazal say the same thing, so when Rabbi Yeshua prayed for her that she should be able to get this spinning wheel, so Hashem brought her into a situation in which she would do so, which is from Taharat. And another connection here is the fact that she, we're saying that this whole Torah is about elevating one's speech. That elevated speech brings one closer to Hashem. In this case, this was the opposite. And as a result of that, she developed Taharat. We know that according to Chazal, the sages, a person only develops this disease, which is really the root disease of all diseases, from negative speech about Jewish people or negative speech about Hashem. That this is like the greatest impediment toward Kedusha, toward the revelation of godliness in the world. And therefore, Hashem is like a carpenter. Menefilat halavush. And the debasement of this garment, that's what produces arrogance. This is what corresponds to the 7 royal houses of Avodah Zarah. We know that Chazal teach in Masechet Gittin that Israel was not exiled until the 7 royal houses had worshipped Avodah Zarah, meaning gods that are not Hashem. So who are these seven houses? We know that the kings are only supposed to come from David, right? Anybody who wants to be a king of the Jewish people, Hashem says he needs to come from the seed of David. And the reason is because David manifested this quality of empowered speech more than anybody. Because he had the deepest level of humility, he was able to utilize that speech to draw everybody close to Hashem. And that's the essence of elevated speech. But what's the opposite of that? When people try and take that grandeur, that malchut, not for the Jewish people, not for Hashem, but for themselves. And this happened with the tribe of Ephraim, that it split up into what was called Yisrael. And then they had seven kingships of Yisrael, even though there was not supposed to be any kings that came from anyone besides the house of David. As a result of these seven kingships, once it got to the seventh, Hashem said enough, and he exiled the Jewish people out of the land of Israel. Because it's taught that when a person is inside the land, it's like he has a God. When he's outside the land, it's like he doesn't. So we see that in order to be able to stay in the land of Israel, for us to be able to come back to the land of Israel, we need to, as a people, be able to recognize that Hashem is the orchestrator of reality. He's the one who creates everything that takes place, recreates everything that takes place, brings all good into the world. And when we don't realize that, and we think it comes from people, places, things, nature, science, X, Y, and Z, then we are exiled to outside of the land. We're exiled to the consciousness of Teva, to the consciousness of nature as being God. And where does really that belief that Hashem doesn't run the world come from? So Rabbi Nachman saying it's very deep. It's not coming from some scientific proof. It's not coming from some enlightened state of existence. It's actually coming from a very deep-rooted, very subtle arrogance that comes from thinking that I run my life. And as soon, Rabbi Nachman says, as a Jew nullifies this belief, he automatically comes to the belief in Hashem. And this is the reason why Avodah Zarah is called Splendor. Like the Pasuk says, K'tiferet Adam l'shevet bayit. Like the beauty of man, it settles, it sits in the home. Because Avodah Zarah, this level of arrogance, specifically the one is that the person is trying to look that they're humble, look like they're something that they're not, to be pretentious. He says this is the greatest level of arrogance of all. And this is the concept of this axe fell 7 years ago. Why? Because this axe, which is the garment of humility, it fell, meaning it went into the Sitra Achra. So I'm using humility in order to be able to gain honor. And why does it fall for 7 years? Just like there were 7 houses of idolatry. Because that's how long it takes before a person gets exiled, before the Jewish people get exiled from the arrogance itself. And it still has not yet reached the ground, meaning, through this error of Klal Yisrael, we still have not returned to the land of Israel. It's a very deep thing. We have not been back in the land of Israel for 2,000 years. 2,000 years. Through the Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust, through the period of the Greeks and the Romans and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians. For 2,000 years, we still have not been able to make it back to Eretz Yisrael. And what's the reason? Rabbi Nachman says, all because of this one error, this error of pretentiousness, being fake, not being honest, not being simple, not realizing that everything comes from Hashem and it's not from our own koach. And as a result of that, we're still not back in the land. Shehu ke'oved avodah zarah. And when you're outside of the land, it's ke'eved, it's like that you're serving avodah zarah, like the Gemara says. Bechinat sheva batei. Because the fact that one's outside of the land, it's coming from the fact that he thinks that they run the world, or nature runs the world. And therefore we're exiled from the land. And because of this, we still have not returned. And everything is coming from this error. This is the cause of the entire exile of the Jewish people. Because it's avodah zarah. It says not only because the water is abundant. And do not say it's because this axe has not yet reached the ground. In other words, don't say we can't reach the land of Israel because the water is abundant. Meaning what? That there's many issues to living in the land. that it's financially difficult, that it's not fitting for a family in 2021, that it's any host of reasons that people have for not living in the land of Israel. Right, just like back 2,000 years ago, even 3,000 years ago, when Hashem first told us to go into the land, you had these people who were big tzaddikim. They were mamish leaders of communities, and some of the biggest ones amongst the Jewish people. And when Hashem told them to go look at the land, or actually they asked to, and Hashem said, okay. So when they came back, they said, yeah, the land's beautiful, it's amazing, the fruit is beautiful, and the weather's amazing, and but there's 7 gigantic nations over there, and there's no way we're ever going to be able to get into the land of Israel. Now, the Zohar says that the truth was that because they had established positions of authority outside of the land, and they knew that if they came to the land of Israel, they would have to start over again, so to speak. They would have to go into bitul, self-nullification. They would lose their concessions. They would lose their cronies. So as a result of them losing their position of authority and grandeur, they didn't want to move to the land of Israel, because they knew in the land of Israel, there's only one, there's Hashem. Outside of the land, I can hold that throne on my own and pretend it's for the sake of Hashem, but really, I just crave this power, this authority. And this is why Yoshua ben Nun and Kalev ben Yehunya were the only ones who were able to see the land as it really was, because they were faithful students of Moshe Rabbeinu, that they didn't think of themselves more than they were, that it said that Yoshua never left the tent of Moshe, that they compared Yoshua like the moon to Moshe's son. And as a result of that, he was able to receive the light completely, which we're going to say later on. And so too by Kalev. Kalev comes from the house of David. It's the same family. So he has humility. It's already in his soul. And when the Jewish people were at risk of not getting into the land, and he himself was at risk of going to spy the land, how he was going to come back and give that report, he went to Kavarim, he went to the graves of Tzaddikim and prayed by them. So we see from this, he doesn't think it comes from himself. And this was the whole difference between these 2 Jewish people and the rest of the spies. As a result of that, the rest of them passed away before we got into the land of Israel. And it was only Yoshua ben Nun and Kalev who were able to take them into the land. Not only that, but they became the leaders of their respective tribes in the land of Israel. In fact, Yoshua became the leader of the whole Jewish people. It's like Chazal say that when a person really is not looking for any honor, then the world accords him honor, because then his honor is not his own, it's Hashem's. So don't say it's coming from these many nations, which are compared to water. But because the water runs so rapidly, meaning because they're running after honor, which he says that the concept of kavod, honor, is the concept of water. Like we say on Shabbat, Ela kavod harim, Hashem elamayim rabim. This is Hashem, the God of glory, it thunders. Hashem amayim rabim, he's on many waters. What's the concept of many waters? It's the concept of the ability to be able to hear the thunder of Hashem. You have to first get through many waters. Meaning there's many levels of humility one has to acquire before he actually hears the voice of Hashem calling. Many people think that Hashem only spoke to Avraham, the first Jew, right? My friend asked me, why did Hashem wait 2,000 years to speak to somebody? So I told him he didn't wait 2,000 years. He's been speaking since the beginning. Avraham was just the first one to hear it. And the reason Avraham was the first one to hear it is because he was the first one to achieve true humility. And we're going to learn what's the reason he was able to achieve true humility, because he was the first one to have a brit milah. He was the first one to be able to master sexuality and to utilize it as a tool to reveal something higher, not as an act in and of itself. And because of this running after honor, we're constantly, everybody, wherever we are, running after honor, running after respect, running after reputation, running after that my name should ring bells, right? All of these things. This is all what's preventing us from returning to the land of Israel. Because the main cause of this lengthy exile, which prevents us from returning to our land, is only this one error. And it's an amazing thing, in sports, I always say this. It's not good enough to be great anymore. You have to be the GOAT. You have to be the greatest of all time, right? You have to scream it. You have to put it on your Twitter account. You have to put it on your Facebook. You have to put it on social media. Everyone needs to know that I'm the best. Why? The reason is very deep, because inside we're very, very empty. In 2021, we have the lowest self-confidence that we've ever had, the lowest self-esteem that we've ever had. And when a person doesn't realize, they don't understand that esteem, self-esteem, if it's connected to Hashem, if a person realizes that they have a nefesh elokit mamish, that they have a piece of God inside of them, it's perfect. And there's nothing that a person can do to even tarnish or change or transform or transmute this piece of them. And that's their essence. When a person really connects to that, then I don't look for reverence from others. I don't look for respect from others. I don't need someone to come and say I'm the goat, because I already feel that I'm a piece of the goat. I'm already a piece of Hashem, right? And you know, I somebody came to me once and said to me, he was telling me that there's this person who's very technologically advanced, and he has this idea. He wants to move to a new planet and start a new civilization. And I started laughing. So he said, why are you laughing at me? I said, Chas v'shalom, I'm so sorry. I'm not laughing at you. It's so twisted and scary how the modern world makes us feel so empty. And as a result of that, we don't feel like we can get joy wherever we live, wherever we're at. And instead, we have to go travel to another planet to have a civilization that we like, to have a culture that we're interested in, that we're approving of, and to live the way that we want to live. And I responded to him. I mamish feel like Hashem spoke through me, like mamish nevuah. I told him that the further that a person is from joy, the further he has to run to be able to find it. And we see never in history have we been traveling across the world looking for joy like we are now, and running up empty, because it's not in a place, it's within you. And the Yetzer Hara has us traveling like hamsters in a wheel, running and running and looking for real joy. And it's nowhere to be found. And the reason is because it's not outside of you, it's inside of you. And the whole essence of why Hebcastrut to a real tzaddik, why attachment to a real spiritual master is so vital, is because he illuminates that point inside of you and makes you not feel the need to get it, your fill from elsewhere. And then you're whole, and then you have peace, and then it's Shabbat for you. And then you're in Eretz Yisrael. But Rabbi Nachman says that this voice called out from Shemayim and said, how much of a busha, how embarrassing is this concept of arrogance. Meaning that they would distance themselves from the arrogance in order that people should give them honor. He says this is like the greatest level of arrogance. Then Hashem's kavod, when a person has removed himself from this completely, even that level, then Hashem's kavod is complete. And one merits to speech, which enlightens what's called the bird, like we explained before. We said that the bird is the concept of speech that's rectified. And this speech is what allows us to fly back up to Hashem, just like the bird. But how does one achieve this? How does one actually break his own ego? How does one nullify his sense of self as separate from the world, as separate from the Jewish people, as separate from Hashem, as separate from his Torah? How does one break this superficial shell, which is disconnecting us from all good? As you can guess, Rabbi Nachman says it's only possible through guarding the brit. You know, I have many students like, oh my gosh, every lesson is about the brit. Every lesson is about the brit. And the reason is very deep, because on the 8th day, when a Jewish boy is born into the world, the first mitzvah that he does, the first act he experiences in his life, so to speak, is to remove a piece of skin which is excessive, which he doesn't need, but he's born with. And as a result of that, he has what's called the 8th day. 8 is always the concept of something infinite, something transcendent. If you flip the 8 to the side, it's like an infinity sign, right? Meaning pure godliness, something which transcends this physical world. And that's what a Jew is. How does he get to experience that? He only gets to experience that when he removes that piece of excessive shell that he was born with that he doesn't need. And that's a microcosm of one's ego. And therefore we see that the concept of ego and the concept of brit are very connected. So how does one achieve full level of shmirat the brit, like people constantly ask? So he says, this bird was called Ziz Sadai. And he says that this bird called Ziz Sadai, that King David says is with me, meaning I have finally achieved shmirat the brit. And King David is the concept of perfected tefillah, perfected speech, to be able to enlighten and empower himself to get close to Hashem and everybody else around him, all through Ziz Sadai, all through the 2 levels of the Brit. That's the concept of the upper and lower unifications. Like we said before, in the beginning of this lesson, that the Brit is alluded to in Shema Yisrael. When you say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, how many words is that? 6. Why is 6 words? Because it's corresponding to the Brit, says the Zohar, says the Eitz Chaim, right? It's corresponding to the Brit. The number 6 is always the concept of the Sfira Yesod. So this is the upper level of the Brit. And then you whisper, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchut Olam Va'ed. That's also 6 words. Why? Because it's also the Brit, but it's the lower level of the Brit. So through the upper and the lower level, a person achieves real humility, and then their speech is able to bring them all the way back to Hashem. So now Rabbi Nachman says, this upper and lower unification of guarding the Brit on both levels, once a person has this, then the concept of kavod, meaning honor, true honor, not for oneself, but for the source of his reality to Hashem, it's complete. And when this kavod, this glory is complete, it's early over here. One merits to the bird's speech. Why? Because the ziz corresponds to the lower unification, to Mettat, from the distant corner of the earth. Okay, we know that according to Zohar, according to Kabbalah, according to even Masechet Chagiga, right? You see there when the 4 sages went up to Pardes, and they all got confused because they saw Ziz Sadai, they saw Mettat. This is this malach, this angel, that he, so to speak, controls the 6 days of the week. And even though in truth it's only Hashem, but he veils himself. He hides himself within this malach Mettat, and that's what they saw. And as a result of everyone besides Rabbi Akiva, everyone fell off. One person passed away, another person lost his mind, another person stopped believing in Hashem. The only one who came out unscathed was Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva, after having been an atheist his whole life, and then finally doing tshuva at 40 years old, and learning with little children in Cheder, the Aleph Bet. So when a person goes through that experience after thinking that they're right their whole life, that brings tremendous humility. And as a result of that humility, when he got to Pardes, he wasn't confused by lower levels of godliness. He didn't mistake them for Hashem himself, because he didn't have any kavod of his own. He had no honor of his own. And then he could see clearly. Therefore, he came out in peace. And that's why there's 6 days of the week, because the 6 is also corresponding to the Brit. Just like there's 6,000 years of creation, where all of this is to rectify the Brit. And we learned earlier that how does one do so on the 6 days of the week? Through learning halakha. Rabbi Nachman said in his will before he passed away, every Jew needs to learn Shulchan Aruch every single day. Now on paper, it might seem like a simple exhortation from our Rebbe to learn Jewish law so we know what to do. And obviously there is that. But Rabbi Nachman was not simple, even though he was simple, right? Everything he said was very, very deep and was based on tremendous levels of Kabbalah and Chassidut, the writings of the Arizal, everything. So when he says something, it's welled up with meaning. So one of the things that we're learning now is that the lower level of the Brit, to be able to be Shmir with the Brit, the lower level is called keeping halakha, learning halakha and keeping halakha. As we find in Midrash Rabbah, there's one bird which when it spreads out its wings, which is called kenafav, it blackens out or blocks out the sun. What is the Midrash speaking about? Its name is Ziz. So we see the bird comes up in the Midrash. Chazal speak about this bird. What does it do? It blocks out the sun. Just like this lower malach Mettat, during the week, we don't feel Hashem running our lives. We feel heavy, we feel sad, we feel anxious, we feel confused, we feel overwhelmed. All of that is because Hashem is not revealing himself to us as he is, so to speak. He's clothing himself within Mettat, this malach Mettat. And as a result of that, it blocks out the light of the sun. And the reason Hashem does so is to afford us bechira, free will. Because when Hashem is perfectly revealed to you, that he's the one who's doing everything, he's the one orchestrating every event in your life, he's recreating all of reality at every moment, he's the one who's sustaining you, then you don't really have free will to choose anymore. Because when a person knows, the choice is taken from him. That's why when Mashiach comes, at least Mashiach ben David, so as a result of that, bechira, free will, is going to be taken. And not because free will is literally taken, but because knowledge is going to fill the world like water covers the sea. And as a result of that deep, deep, deep consciousness, which is going to permeate reality, that Hashem runs existence, and he always has, and he always will. And we're, so to speak, experiencers of that orchestration, not that we actually cause things to take place. So that then there's no choice anymore, because what else would you want to do beside what Hashem wants? So that's the concept of Ziz. This corresponds to the lower unification, Mettat, from the kanaf of the earth. This is like the corner of the garment, right? In which that the sun or the brit, the upper brit, is enclosed, meaning the concept of sadai. So we're saying like this, just to put it simply. I know this is a very difficult lesson. Hashem, there's a concept from Kabbalah, the Rizal really accentuates, and which Chassidus goes crazy with. It's the concept of levush, a garment, to enclose something very intense in order to be able to reveal it based on the receiver, so that it doesn't overwhelm them. So for us during the week, Hashem enclosed his infinite light within this malach that's called Mettat. Because through that malach, we're able to receive Hashem's light in a way which is fitting and corresponding to the spiritual level which we have achieved, the level of the brit in which we've achieved. And in this case, the learning of halakha, right? Our knowledge of halakha, our living with Jewish law. So all of those are the concept of Mettat. Now, when a person learns halakha, they might say to themselves, well, this is very black and white, or this is very boring. Where is spirituality in this? Like when I learn, Likutey Moharan, I'm like flying, I feel close to Hashem. When I learn halakha, it's like so far from that. So Rabbi Nachman pointed out earlier that in fact, halakha is nothing other than Kabbalah, except it's just constricted. The light is constricted. It's enclosed many times until you get to these basic laws. But if a person really understands the depths of these laws, he understands it tracks its way all the way back to Kabbalah. And in fact, there's nothing other than Jewish mysticism enclosed within laws. It's very deep. And this is one of the secrets of why Rabbi Nachman told Rav Natan to make Likutey Halachot, to take all of Rabbi Nachman's Torah and his very deep wisdom that's based on Kabbalah, and to use it to be able to explain all the laws in the Shulchan Aruch, which is mamish. There's no book like this in the world, which obviously we started doing this year. Bezrat Hashem, Sunday, we're going to continue. But that's all during the week, because you can't see it, so to speak, unless you're holding at a very high level. But when a person's able to hold at this level, then by the time Shabbat comes, this is the concept of the upper brit. And this is the concept of Hashem revealing himself as he really is, so to speak, like the sun. That there's no sheath, there's no cover, there's no constriction. That's why when a person on Shabbat, like during the week, if he doesn't work, he feels like he's losing his mind. He feels like he's not going to be able to support himself. But during Shabbat, he doesn't work at all. He doesn't even turn on fire. He doesn't put on his TV. He doesn't look at his phone. He's not doing anything. And yet he has all the food that he needs. He has all the drink that he needs. He has his family. He has his friends. He literally has everything that he wants on Shabbat. But he's not doing anything for it. He's not working for it. Because on Shabbat, it's the one day of the week that Hashem reveals himself as he actually is, so to speak. Like the sages say that Shabbat is 1/60th of Olam Haba, right? And what's Olam Haba? Olam Haba is the place where consciousness is going to be elevated to realize that there's nothing else besides Hashem. And that's called the upper brit, as opposed to the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuta that we whisper. Why are we whispering it? Because it's veiling the light of Hashem. But Shema Yisrael, the highest level of Shema, the upper level, this is the concept of the highest level of mastery in the area of sexuality that usually only the great tzaddikim are able to achieve. And that's the concept of Shabbat. And when a person has both of these levels, then they're able to achieve perfected speech. Now, a person might ask, and then we'll conclude, a person might ask, well, what about me? You know, I'm not the tzaddik of the generation. I'm not one of the tzaddikim of the generation. I can barely get up in the morning. Right? I'm lucky if I get up for my cup of coffee. So how do we take this lesson in our life? Because we know that Rabbi Nachman said explicitly that every single lesson that I wrote is applicable to everybody at every moment. So first of all, there's a tzaddik within you. Rabbi Nachman says elsewhere in Likutey Moharan that the peace inside everybody that's called Mashiach, there's a spark of Mashiach inside everybody, right? We know that Chabad speaks a lot about this. Rabbi Nachman says explicitly, what is that spark? It's your brit. That when a person achieves mastery in the area of sexuality, he's illuminating that spark of Mashiach inside of him, okay? So therefore, every Jew is capable of this. And that's the reason why when we have a Brit Milah on the 8th day, because Hashem made us capable of being able to harness the physical world, to harness our physical body, to use it as a vehicle to be able to express something deeper, something godly, something infinite, to use the finite to express infinite. And that's the secret of the Beit HaMikdash, that this is the space, this is the makom in which the light of Hashem is revealed, but it's a physical space, but it's containing something infinite. It's like me and you. So how do we achieve that? Only through the tikkun of the brit. So we can do it. First thing to know is you can do it. Rabbi Nachman says that anybody who attaches themselves to me, and this is part of the second part of the answer, I can make him into a tzaddik mamish, just like me. Okay? So Rabbi Nachman says something, it wasn't for chizik, it's because it's a fact. If you attach yourself to Rabbi Nachman in truth, he says, I'll make you into a tzaddik. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That's called Hebcastrut to the tzaddik. This is something that Rabbi Nachman stressed more than anything. And he said that this is the most important thing that a Jewish person can do in their life, to have attachment to a real tzaddik. So like we've said in the past, how does someone attach themselves to a real tzaddik? One, at the basic level, we learn their Torah. So we're doing that right now. So just by learning Rabbi Nachman's Torah, we're rectifying our brit, and we're making it that our prayer is able to get answered more, that our speech is able to elevate us more. Second level is by giving tzedakah to the tzaddik. In this case, because Rabbi Nachman has passed away, by giving tzedakah to those students that are spreading his teachings and trying to bring the light of godliness to the world through the light of the tzaddik. So that's exactly what the tzaddik would be doing with that money, right? If you gave tzedakah to the tzaddik, he would utilize that money in order to be able to bring you up to higher places, because the root of money comes from the same root as the soul. So when you give your money over to a tzaddik, it's like you're giving a piece of yourself. That's why it's so hard to get rid of. And then as a result of that, it becomes much easier for the tzaddik to be able to rectify. That's the reason why Rabbi Nachman says, come to my kever, give a coin for tzedakah, literally just a pruta, and say some tilim, and I'm going to go the width and the length and expanse of reality in order to pull you out of whatever struggle or darkness that you're in. Why does he need that piece of tzedakah? Because it's that little piece of yourself, and it's also a level of humility. So by attaching ourselves through tzedakah, that's a higher level than just learning his teachings. But you need both. It's like rungs of a ladder. And then the highest rung is to be able to actually get to the kever, to get to the grave side of the tzaddik, and to pour your heart out about everything that you've been through in your life, and to ask for someone to advocate for you, that you're going through whatever you're going through in your life, and you're struggling and you're having difficulties and challenges and trials and tribulations. You need help, physical health issues, livelihood issues, peace at home issues, children issues, whatever it is. So we need a big Yeshua. So for that, we're going to need a real tzaddik to leave the field, so to speak, to come get us. And that you do by coming to him and just pouring forth your heart. So these are the 3 levels of attachment. When a person has these 3 levels of attachment, then it's as if, so to speak, he rectified his own brit, even though he's not there yet. He gets the VIP card, like I like to say. He's not there yet, but he gets it as if he is, right? And then his speech is perfected. And then when he comes to pray to Hashem or he comes to learn Torah, every single word that he says literally elevates him closer to Hashem and elevates others closer to Hashem. And this, Rabbi Nachman, he brings the ending of this Torah. Ani Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem, your God. Hu Shemi, that's my name. Utihilati, Uchvodi la'acher lo aten, and my honor I don't give to another. Utihilati lapsilim, and my praise I don't give to idols. Okay, so now Rabbi Nachman says this is all of our lessons encompassed in this pasuk. Ani Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei Yehuda Ilah. This is the upper unification. This is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. This is the upper level of the brit. This is having achieved the highest level of mastery in the area of sexuality. Tikkun brit. Hu Shemi, that's my name. That's when you whisper Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. That's the concept of halacha. That's the lower level of the brit. Then once a person has achieved both the upper and the lower level of the brit, Uchvodi la'acher lo aten. He says this corresponds. My glory, I shouldn't give it to another. It means that glory, kavod, honor has been restored to its place, meaning you're back in the land of Israel. You're back in the place where speech is answered. You're back in the place where speech illuminates and empowers. You're back in the place where speech brings you back to the root of your soul, which is called the land of Israel. Why? Because we said before, Rabbi Nachman teaches that Moshe Rabbeinu said, I can't help the Jewish people. I can't talk to Paro because my lips are heavy. They're kaved. My mouth is kaved. It's a chaf, a bet, and a dalet, right? So we see that King David says later, though, that I will not be silent for your kavod. What's the difference between the word honor and heavy? It's just the vav. So just like King David says, I saw Ziz Sadai is with me, it means that he achieved complete tikkun brit. So the vav, which is the gematria 6, then falls into kaved, which is heavy, and it makes it kavod, honor. And when a person truly appreciates and has reverence for Hashem and understands the gifts that he's given him and knows in truth that everything comes from him, there's nothing else besides him, then his speech has the ability to empower himself and others, like we see is manifested in King David, the Mashiach himself. Nor is my tehillah, my praise, given to idols. Zebechinat the dibur, this concept of speech. Kamosha katuv, tehilat Hashem yidaber pi. Gratitude towards Hashem, my mouth is going to speak. Right? The greatness of Hashem, my mouth is going to speak. This is the concept of rectified speech. Rabbi Nachman says all of Olam Haba, he says this in the famous Hanukkah Torah in Tinyana, that all of Olam Haba is the recognition of the oneness of Hashem. And when a person truly recognizes the oneness of Hashem, that everything is good, everything is from the one who does good, even the negative and the challenges in our life, which we face on a daily basis, right? The Gemara says, what's the difference between now and then? That now we say in the future that Hashem will be one and his name will be one. Oh, hashgacha pratis. You see that? That's exactly what we're talking about. When the upper and the lower unity are the same. When Hashem will be one and his name will be one. When we won't see a difference between Kabbalah and Halacha. When we won't see a difference between Jewish mysticism and Jewish law. We'll see it's one thing. We won't see a difference between the higher levels of spirituality and the lowly, mundane events in our life. We'll see that they're all really one. So once we're able to appreciate that, then all we're going to say is Tov Metiv, that Hashem is the one who's good and who does good. Nowadays, when we hear good news, we say Tov Metiv, the one who's good and who does good. When we hear bad news, we say Baruch Dayan Emet. Blessed is the true judge, right? We're not diminishing the feelings of the person who told us the bad news, but we're also just recognizing in the pain that Hashem knows what he's doing. So what's the whole difference between then and now? In the future, we're only going to say Tova Metiv. So Rabbi Nachman says, what's different in the future? That we're going to be conscious. Now we're sleeping. So he says, really, if you're conscious now, so you could just say Tova Metiv, so to speak, on everything. You should be able to, right? So how does a person ever get to the point that he really sees that everything that Hashem does is for his good? And this goes to the depths of Rabbi Nachman's Torah. It comes from complete humility. And this level of complete humility comes from Shmirat the Brit, which is why Rabbi Nachman is obsessed with this concept. And just as like a last statement or point, and this is going to, Bezrat Hashem, bring us into Shabbat, the level of Kabbalah, the upper unity, we see that Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef, comes before Yehuda, comes before Mashiach ben David. And we think of this usually globally, that the redemption of the Jewish people first comes from Mashiach ben Yosef, and then from Mashiach ben David. Kabbalistically, Yosef is corresponding to the Brit, and David is corresponding to empowered speech. So in a very deep way, what we're learning is the reason why Yosef has to come before David is because the ability for a person to pray and get their prayers answered, to be able to speak in a way which literally encourages and empowers and elevates himself and those around them, it all comes from his level of the Brit, meaning the presence of Yosef within him, the tzaddik within him. And this is where this is why Rabbi Nachman says how important it is to have Hebcastrut with the real tzaddik. Because if a person really attaches himself to real tzaddikim, then they become tzaddikim themselves. And then we're able to achieve this entire 11th Torah. Bezrat Hashem, next week we're going to start the 12th Torah of the Moharan, which is Mamash a doozy. I'm going to have to put our big boy pants on. So anybody have any questions from this lesson? I know it's a little longer than usual. We've been on this lesson now for months and I wanted to finish it. Any questions? Did anybody hear the class?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Yes.
Oh, of course. Great. Oh, Hashem.
Hi,
Any
I have
other
a question.
Why were you dancing the whole time?
Oh, very good. Avi, it's a great question. I don't know. How come you're not
I was
dancing? Where are
laughing.
you?
I am dancing on the inside in a trance. I could, but I don't want to cause too much attention. But I was dancing with you inside.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm dancing with you. You don't see my feet. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? I heard somebody
so we can
coming
go
in.
to any tzaddik and pray, not just Rabbi Nachman, right? Like Lubavitch, can go.
Anybody who Rabbi Nachman is calling what's called a tzaddik emes, a true tzaddik. The Arizal brings down that in every generation, right? We know that there's 36 tzaddikim, but there's only what's called one tzaddik ador. There's only one tzaddik of the generation. So over the course of history, there have been what the Baal Tanya says, only a handful of tzaddikai emet, of not just tzaddikim, but this highest level of tzaddik, that he's like the embodiment of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that all of the tzaddikim besides him are, so to speak, extensions of him. Just like all of the tzaddikim that have come from Moshe Rabbeinu, really they're like extensions of Moshe himself. So too, you can do this with any real tzaddik, and because of my experience and because of what I've seen, because of what I've experienced in my life and what I've whatever, I don't know how else to say, but the only one I could for sure vouch for is Rabbi Nachman. I know that there's more. I know that the Arizal is one of them. I know that Rabbi Shimon Yochai is one of them. I know Moshe Rabbeinu is one of them. The Baal Shem Tov is one of them. But I don't want to say anything that I don't know for sure, because I have a huge responsibility when I teach these classes and when I give Torah over to you guys, which I take very seriously, that I know that whoever is listening, and I want my speech to be empowered speech, and so therefore I just want to tell you what I know for sure. Rabbi Nachman is a real tzaddik, and not just a real tzaddik, but he's a tzaddik emes.
So I have a question. If I cannot go to Uman, can I just turn the light and pray?
Oh, good. So when I was in Uman, I actually asked somebody there, is there any way I can like bring this back home with me? Is there anything I could do on a daily basis? Because when you're in Uman for Rosh Hashanah or whenever you go, you really feel like that connection, and you really feel close to Hashem. So he told me, yeah, it's brought in Rabbi Nachman's book that he wrote when he was a child, right? The Torah that he brought out when he was a child. He wrote there in Sefer Midot that when you light a candle for a tzaddik, you literally bring like his neshama into the place where you are. So I actually every night, B'ezrat Hashem, whenever I get the zchut to wake up for chatzot and to learn Torah, so I'll light a candle, put it next to my my desk. So good question, Shalom.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, guys? Statements, anything? This was a long time that we worked on this.
Great class.
No. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi. So you were saying something about a lack, and when you see a lack, that there's something for us to do about it. Is that what you meant? I'm not sure if I understood
sure.
it exactly.
Yeah. I was throwing in a different lesson of Rabbi Nachman to try to give context to what we were learning, but I could see how it could be missed. So Rabbi Nachman says in the 5th lesson of Moharan, which I believe was actually the first lesson that Rav Natan heard, his main student, that whenever you see a lacking in the world, then it's incumbent upon you to pray to fill that lack. Where do we know that from? Because it says in Chazal that a person needs to know the whole world is created just for you. You need to know that. It's a Torah. It's mamash, the sages said this, like halacha. You need to know the whole entire universe was created just for you. So Rabbi Nachman then takes it a step further. He says, okay, it's beautiful. For me to do what? So Rabbi Nachman says, it was created for me to fill in that which is lacking. Meaning Hashem purposely created lackings in the world that we should fill it. Now, how do we fill the lackings that we see in the world or within others or within ourselves? Rabbi Nachman says all lackings are filled through tefillah, through prayer.
Got it. So basically it's like it's like what the Baal Shem Tov says, that everything that we see is like a lesson for us, is something that we
exactly.
We could
the
actually,
whole
but
world
it's
is
also
created for you, meaning every day the world is created just for you, right? And that everything that you see is not stopping. If really Hashem is recreating the world at every moment, and everything he does is to bring you closer to him. Sorry, 1 second. So that means necessarily that everything that takes place in your life, if you have the eyes to see, is really a message for you to learn from. And the Baal Shem Tov was busy with this. And Rabbi Nachman says in another Torah in Likutey Moharan that when a person gets to a certain level, he could see these hints that Hashem is giving him every day. That he literally said that there's an action every day, which is a hint to you. There's a speech every day, which is a hint to you. And there's a machshava, there's a thought every day, which is a hint to you. But we're learning that the way to be able to see these hints, to perceive these hints, comes from humility.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.
Rabbi,
So
if I may,
we have big
with all due
shoes to
respect,
fill.
Yes.
At Tzaddik Nistar, I think people think is a lashon of hidden, but I think it could be, with all due respect, and Nistar like a lashon seiser and boine, when you knock it down and then you have to build it up again. So Shema, sometimes you have to get knocked down. Everybody's really a Tzaddik Nistar. There's 37, there's hundreds of them. There's ones, and they're all the same. But it's
Right.
lashon Nistar, I think. I don't know
Very
much.
nice. Beautiful. No. Very good. Very good. In fact, Rabbi Nachman says in Likutey Moharan that a hidden tzaddik is capable of achieving more for the Jewish people than a revealed one, which is why the Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi Nachman never wanted to reveal themselves. Only when Hashem forced them, so to speak, because the Jewish people needed them, did they do so. So too, within
Why
ourselves.
is Rabbi revealing himself?
Not there yet. If and when Hashem tells me to. So there's a tzaddik within each of us, and the ability to be able to connect to that tzaddik comes with a lot of stumbling and falling and picking oneself back up. And Rabbi Nachman says that when Mashiach comes, the chiddush of Mashiach is not that when you it's not that everything was for the best. We know that that's going to be the case. That's not really a chiddush. He says the whole chiddush, the novelty of Mashiach, is that you at your lowest, you were really at your highest. That you never had more godliness burning through you than when you were barely getting out of bed, when you were depressed, when you were anxious, struggling, all of these things. So this is when the tzaddik was inside of you, was strongest. And this is something that we're only going to see when the Mashiach takes place.
Maybe Mashiach is already here. We don't know it yet.
Bezrat Hashem.
Every generation has a Mashiach, I think.
That's right.
Respect.
Yeah, that's right.
I think Mashiach, if I may, is like a Lashon Mashiach. I think he just talks. He's not going to be huge revelations. I think if I'm not mistaken, when I read the Rambam, it sounds like it's not even going to be noticeable. It's just going to be revelations of words, of perspectives, of das. As Hashem is Bach.
So Rabbi Nachman says that when Mashiach comes, everyone is going to be very thrown in a daze and very confused and overwhelmed because they didn't expect it would be him. He says the only people who will not be will be my students. He said for them, they're going to have Yishuv Das because they already heard this stuff. Everybody have a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom V'ah, Shabbat Shalom Menucha.